I'll never forget the winter of 1990. I was 35 years old, a husband, a father, and a man who thought he understood the meaning of friendship. Back then, if you'd asked me who I trusted most in the world outside my family, I would have said his name without hesitation: Ethan Cole. We had been inseparable since high school, and in many ways he felt like a brother. But what I didn't know was that when life fell apart, when I needed him more than ever, he wouldn't just turn his back on me. He would take what little I had left and vanish without a word. That betrayal shaped my life in ways I couldn't imagine. And last week, 34 years later, his name came across my desk. He was asking me for help, for a grant from my foundation, the very organization I built out of the ashes of those years. I signed it with one line: "Denied, friends stick around." But to understand why, you need to know the whole story. My name is David Mercer, and in 1990, I was living what I thought was a stable life. My wife, Laura, and I had been married for 12 years. She had this calm strength about her, the kind of presence that made you believe things would be okay even when they weren't. We had 2 kids, Ryan, 10, curious and always asking questions about the world, and Emily, just 7, full of laughter and innocence. For me, they weren't just my family. They were my purpose. Every long day at the office, every late-night pitch, every deal I chased, it was all for them. And then there was Ethan. Ethan Cole was the kind of guy everyone wanted to be around. Tall, sharp dresser, with a smile that could convince you to follow him anywhere. He had this energy, restless, hungry, always chasing the next big thing. Where I was steady, Ethan was reckless. Where I was cautious, Ethan was bold. We balanced each other out. I introduced him to clients. I vouched for him. I trusted him with everything. He wasn't just my best friend. He was Ryan's godfather. At family barbecues, he'd throw Ryan in the air and tell him, "Kid, you've got the best dad in the world." I believed him. I believed every word. That's why, when my world came crashing down, Ethan was the first person I turned to. It was January of 1990 when the company I worked for called me into the office. I'd been in advertising sales for over a decade, climbing the ladder slowly but surely. I thought I was safe. But the recession didn't care about loyalty or hard work. I sat in a small office with a man from corporate who couldn't even look me in the eye as he slid a piece of paper across the desk. "We're downsizing. It's not personal." That was it. 10 years of my life packed into a cardboard box. I walked out into the freezing air with the weight of that box in my arms and the even heavier weight of shame in my chest. When I walked through the front door that afternoon, Ryan's eyes lit up. "Dad, you're home early." He thought it was good news. Emily came running too. Laura saw my face and knew instantly. I didn't even have to say the words. That night, when the kids were asleep, I drove to meet Ethan at our usual spot, a little bar on the corner where we'd been going since our 20s. I told him everything: the layoff, the fear, the uncertainty. Ethan listened, nodding, sipping his drink with that calm look he always had when he was about to reassure you. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said the words that burned themselves into my memory. "Don't worry, brother. I'll help you. I'll make some calls. I'll make sure you're taken care of." And just like that, I believed him. I went home that night and told Laura, "It's going to be okay. Ethan's got my back." She smiled faintly, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. I didn't know it yet, but that promise, that single moment of comfort, was the beginning of a 6-month descent into hell. Because Ethan's idea of help wasn't lifting me up. It was stepping on me to climb higher. And the reason I signed his grant request with the words "Denied, friends stick around," is because when it came down to it, he didn't. Before I tell you how everything fell apart, I need to take you back to the life I had before the storm. Because the truth is, if you had looked at me in early 1990, you would have thought I had it made. I wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but I had the things that mattered most to me: a steady career, a loving wife, 2 kids who looked up to me, and the kind of best friend you thank God for having in your corner. At least, that's what I thought. I grew up in a working-class family. My mother, Margaret, raised me and my brother after my dad passed away when I was a teenager. She was a tough woman, sharp as nails, and she always drilled into me the value of loyalty. "David," she used to say, "friends are your second family. Blood doesn't always make family. Who shows up for you does." I carried those words into adulthood like a compass, and maybe that's why I clung so tightly to my friendship with Ethan Cole. By 1990, I had been married to Laura for 12 years. Laura was the heart of our family. She had this calm, patient way about her, like no matter how bad things got, she could find the light in it. She was a nurse, working long shifts, but she never complained. She believed in me, sometimes more than I believed in myself. I'd come home late from the office, exhausted, and she'd greet me with a warm meal and a quiet smile that told me I was doing something right. Our son, Ryan, was 10 at the time. He was the kind of kid who couldn't sit still, always curious, always tinkering with something. If he wasn't taking apart his toys to see how they worked, he was asking me 100 questions about the world. "Dad, why does the moon change shapes?" Or, "How do cars stay on the road when they go so fast?" He had this spark that made me proud and terrified at the same time because I wanted to give him the world. And then there was Emily. Sweet, wide-eyed Emily, just 7 years old. She loved to draw. Our fridge was covered in her sketches of houses, trees, and the four of us standing under a big sun. To her, the world was simple and safe, and I wanted nothing more than to keep it that way. Family meant everything to me, and back then, I thought friendship did too. Ethan had been in my life since high school. He was magnetic, the kind of guy who walked into a room and made people want to follow him. I was quieter, more deliberate, but somehow we balanced each other. He pushed me to take risks, and I grounded him when his schemes got too wild. At least, that's how it used to be. Ethan wasn't just my best friend. He was like another uncle to my kids. On summer afternoons, he'd come over, toss Ryan into the air, and say, "Kid, your dad's the best man I know. Never forget that." He brought gifts for Emily, little notebooks for her drawings, and he'd kneel down to her level and tell her she was going to be an artist one day. My mother loved him too. She'd say, "David, that boy is loyal to you. You're lucky to have him." And I believed it. At work, I was doing well enough. I wasn't a big shot, but I'd carved out a solid career in advertising sales. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I had a few clients who trusted me, who brought steady business. In a city like ours, industrial, gray, and hit hard by economic shifts, stability was worth gold. We weren't wealthy, but we had Sunday dinners at my mom's, we paid the bills on time, and once in a while I could surprise Laura with flowers or take the kids to the movies. It wasn't a big life, but it was ours, and I was proud of it. Still, there was a quiet unease in the air. The country was struggling with a recession, and layoffs were creeping through industries like a slow-moving storm. In the break room at work, people whispered about who might be next. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I'd worked too hard, built too much trust with my clients. But deep down, a seed of fear was growing. Laura noticed it. One night, after the kids were asleep, she caught me staring at the bills on the kitchen table a little too long. "You're worried, aren't you?" she asked. I tried to play it off with a smile, but she didn't buy it. She put her hand over mine and said softly, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." That was Laura. Always steady, always reminding me that I wasn't alone. And Ethan? Well, Ethan told me not to worry. Over beers at the bar, he'd shrug off my concerns. "Come on, Dave," he'd say with that grin of his. "You're the hardest worker I know. If they're stupid enough to let you go, I'll make sure you land on your feet. I've got connections. You're safe." Back then, I believed him. Because when you grow up hearing that friends are family, you never imagine that one day that family could be the very thing that breaks you. The day it all began, still plays in my head like a movie I can't turn off. It was a gray January morning in 1990, the kind where the cold seeps into your bones before you even step outside. I walked into the office like I had for 10 years, coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other. Something felt off, too quiet, too tense. People avoided eye contact and whispers floated through the hallways. When my manager, Mr. Wallace, called me into his office, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a new account, maybe a performance review, but the second I saw the HR rep sitting there, clutching a folder, my stomach dropped. Wallace cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on the desk rather than on me. "David, I'm sorry. The company is downsizing. Your position has been eliminated. It's not personal." Not personal. 10 years of loyalty, late nights, weekends sacrificed, all reduced to 2 words, not personal. They handed me a box, gave me 15 minutes to clear my desk, and escorted me out like I was some kind of criminal. I remember walking through the icy parking lot, clutching that box of my career, my hands numb from more than the cold. All I could think was, what am I going to tell my family? When I walked through the front door that afternoon, Ryan's eyes lit up. "Dad, you're home early. Want to play catch?" Emily came running, her little arms wrapping around my leg. For a split second, their excitement almost fooled me into thinking this wasn't the worst day of my life. But then Laura looked at me. She didn't ask. She just knew. That night, after the kids were in bed, I drove to meet Ethan at our usual spot, a worn-down bar on the corner where we'd been drinking since we were 21. I sat across from him, laid it all out, the layoff, the fear, the bills piling up. He listened, nodded, then leaned in with that easy confidence of his and said, "Don't worry, brother. I'll help you. I'll make some calls. You'll be back on your feet in no time." I wanted to believe him. In fact, I did believe him. Ethan had always been there. He was the guy who gave the best toasts at weddings, the guy who stood by me when my dad died, the guy who swore he'd always look out for my family. That night, when I told Laura what he said, she gave a small, tired smile. "I hope he means it, David." I brushed it off, insisting, "Of course he does. It's Ethan." But as the weeks passed, the phone stayed silent. I called Ethan, left messages, asked if he'd heard anything. He'd answer once in a while, always with the same vague response. "Yeah, man, working on it. Just give me time." Then I started hearing things. One of my former clients called me, apologetic, almost embarrassed, and said, "I thought you were still handling our account, but Ethan stopped by. He said you'd moved on." My chest tightened. Ethan, the man I trusted like a brother, wasn't helping me at all. He was stealing the very clients that had kept my family afloat. I confronted him once over the phone. My voice shook as I asked, "Ethan, did you take the Mason account?" There was a pause, then a laugh. "Come on, Dave, it's business. You know how this works. Don't take it personally." The same words my boss had used, not personal. But to me, it was the most personal thing in the world. Without my clients, I had nothing. The bills stacked higher each week. Laura worked double shifts at the hospital just to keep food on the table, but it wasn't enough. I pawned my watch, the one gift my father had given me before he died. Eventually, the rent fell behind. I'll never forget the day the landlord came with an eviction notice, his eyes almost pitying as he said, "I'm sorry, David, I have no choice." We had nowhere to go. No savings, no family nearby except my mother, who lived in a tiny apartment she could barely afford. That's when my Uncle Frank stepped in. He owned a warehouse on the edge of town, cold, empty, smelling of rust and dust. He handed me the keys with a sigh. "It's not much, but it'll keep you out of the street." And so, for 6 months, my wife, my 2 children, and I lived in that warehouse. Concrete floors, no heat, just blankets piled high to fight the winter. Ryan would shiver at night, trying to be brave, while Emily would whisper, "Daddy, are we poor now?" That question nearly broke me. I tried to shield them from the worst of it, to make games out of eating canned soup by flashlight, to pretend it was all just a big adventure. But inside, I was collapsing. Every night, staring at the steel rafters above, I thought about Ethan. About the friend who promised to help but instead took what little I had left. And what cut deepest wasn't the hunger, or the cold, or even the shame. It was the silence. Ethan never called, never checked in, not once. That's when I realized betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person you trust most, the one you'd have sworn would never let you fall. 6 months in that warehouse felt like 6 years. Cold concrete floors, the wind whistling through broken window panes, the echo of every cough from my kids bouncing off the metal walls. I tried to keep my head high for Ryan and Emily, but each night, when they finally drifted off to sleep under piles of blankets, I'd lie awake staring at the rafters, wondering if I had failed as a father, as a husband, as a man. Laura never said those words. She never blamed me, but I saw the exhaustion in her face after double shifts at the hospital, the way her hands trembled from fatigue as she bandaged her own blisters. I wanted to carry her burden, but I was barely carrying my own. The lowest point came one night in March. Ryan had a fever. His body shook as he whispered, "Dad, I'm cold." I held him close, rubbing his back, hating myself for not being able to provide even basic warmth. Emily sat beside me, clutching her little stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with fear. That was the night something inside me cracked. The next day, my mother, Margaret, came by with a pot of stew. She was small, gray-haired, worn down by life, but her spirit hadn't dulled. She looked around the warehouse, her eyes lingering on the blankets, the children's drawings taped to the wall, and then she fixed me with that sharp gaze I'd grown up with. "David," she said, setting the pot on an overturned crate, "you've spent your whole life believing people like Ethan would save you, but friends don't fix your life for you. They stand beside you while you fix it yourself. You can't wait for him. You can't wait for anyone. You have to get up and fight." I wanted to argue, to tell her I had nothing left to fight with, but the truth was, I did. I had 2 children and a wife who needed me, and I had a choice. Keep drowning in bitterness over Ethan's betrayal, or claw my way out one brutal inch at a time. That night I stayed awake thinking. By morning I had made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for a miracle. I wasn't going to wait for Ethan's call. I was going to build something out of the scraps of my life. I started with what I could get. Any job that would pay. During the day, I worked construction, hauling bricks and mixing cement until my arms ached. At night, I mopped floors in office buildings, pushing a broom under fluorescent lights while businessmen in suits walked past me without a glance. It was humiliating at times, but I held on to one thought. Every dollar brought us closer to leaving that warehouse. Laura saw the change in me. One night, as I dragged myself in at 2 a.m., covered in dust and sweat, she touched my arm and whispered, "I see you, David. I see how hard you're fighting. Don't stop." Her words became my fuel, but survival wasn't enough. I needed a way back into the world I knew best, sales and business. I started carrying around a battered notebook, jotting down ideas between shifts. What if I created a consultancy that didn't just chase clients but helped small businesses survive? I'd seen how fragile people's livelihoods were. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that could outlast the storms. The first opportunity came almost by accident. A local print shop owner, Mr. Harlan, was struggling to keep his doors open. I offered to help him find clients in exchange for a modest fee. He looked at me skeptically, probably wondering why a man who smelled like bleach from janitorial work was offering business advice. But I convinced him to give me a chance. Within a month, I'd brought in 3 steady clients for him. Word spread. Slowly, other small businesses reached out. I wasn't making much yet, but it was momentum. More importantly, it was dignity. For the first time in months, I looked in the mirror and saw not a broken man, but someone climbing back. One evening, as I tucked Ryan and Emily into their makeshift beds, Ryan asked, "Dad, are we going to stay here forever?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, buddy, I'm working on something. We're going to have a real home again." His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before the layoff. That moment cemented it for me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was rebuilding. Within a year, we moved out of the warehouse and into a small rental house. It wasn't much, but it had heat, running water, and walls that didn't echo with loneliness. For the first time in a long while, Laura and I sat at a real table, eating dinner with our kids, and I felt hope again. I didn't know it then, but those hard years, the sweat, the humiliation, the relentless grind, were the foundation of something greater. I wasn't just patching my life back together, I was planting the seeds of a business that would one day grow into a foundation helping others survive what I had endured. And it all started the moment I stopped waiting for Ethan and decided to stand up on my own. Time has a way of dulling wounds, but some scars never fade. By 2024, I was no longer the desperate man sleeping on a warehouse floor. My consultancy had grown into a thriving organization, and eventually into a foundation that gave grants to small businesses and struggling entrepreneurs. What I had once needed so badly, I now had the privilege to give to others. Each application I signed was a reminder of the man I once was, hungry, broken, but still fighting. On a Tuesday morning last week, my assistant, Claire, walked into my office with a stack of grant applications. I had a routine. I'd review them carefully, looking not just at numbers but at the stories behind the names. Each folder represented a person standing at the edge of survival, someone desperate for a hand up. I never forgot what that felt like. Claire set the stack down. "This one might interest you," she said, tapping the top folder. I opened it casually, pen in hand, scanning the first page, and then my eyes froze. The name: Ethan Cole. For a moment, the room around me blurred. My hand tightened on the pen, and my chest felt heavy, as if 34 years had collapsed into a single heartbeat. Ethan Cole, the man who promised to help me, who stole my clients, who left me to rot in a warehouse while my kids asked if we were poor. His name sat in bold letters at the top of the application, asking me, of all people, for help. I kept reading, forcing myself through every line. His business was failing. He needed funding to stay afloat. His words painted him as desperate, clinging to survival. He wrote about how he'd always believed in loyalty, how he wanted a second chance to rebuild. I almost laughed at the irony. That night, I couldn't sleep. Laura noticed me staring at the ceiling. "What's wrong?" she asked. I handed her the application. She read the name, her eyebrows lifting in shock. "David, it's him." I nodded. "After all these years, he's asking me for help." Laura was quiet for a long moment before saying softly, "What are you going to do?" That was the question. Part of me wanted to slam the folder shut, deny him without a second thought. Another part of me, an older, calmer part, wondered if this was a chance to let go of bitterness. After all, hadn't I built this foundation to lift people up, even the undeserving? But then I remembered Ryan's fever in that warehouse. Emily's frightened whisper, "Daddy, are we poor now?" I remembered Laura working herself to exhaustion, while Ethan prospered off the clients he stole. And I remembered the silence, the fact that in all those years he never once picked up the phone, never once asked if I was alive or dead. The next morning, I called Ryan. He's grown now, with a family of his own. I told him about Ethan's application. There was a long pause on the line before Ryan said, "Dad, do you want to help him?" I sighed. "That's the thing, son. I don't. Not because I'm angry, though I was, for a long time, but because men like him never understood what friendship means. Helping him now wouldn't be kindness. It would be betrayal. To the man I used to be, to your mother, to you and Emily, he left us in the dark. And I can't pretend that never happened." Ryan was quiet, then said, "Then you already know what to do." That afternoon, I sat at my desk with Ethan's application in front of me. I thought about the man I had become, about the hundreds of people we'd helped through the foundation. My whole mission had been born from my suffering in that warehouse. And Ethan? He was part of that story too, not as a friend, not as a savior, but as the reason I learned the difference between loyalty and betrayal. I picked up my pen. My hand didn't tremble. I wrote the words slowly, deliberately, as if carving them into stone. Denied, friends stick around. I slid the folder into the outgoing stack and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in 34 years, I felt the weight of his betrayal lift. Not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed to carry it. That evening, Laura asked me, "Did you decide?" I nodded. Yes, I answered the call he never made. When I slid Ethan's application into the denied stack, it felt like the closing of a circle I never thought would end. 34 years had passed since the warehouse nights, yet the memory had lived inside me like a shadow. Denying his grant wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about truth. For years, I told myself I had moved on. I built a business from nothing, raised my children into strong adults, and turned my suffering into something that could help others. But deep down, part of me had always been waiting for this, waiting to face the ghost of Ethan Cole. And when his name landed on my desk, I realized something I hadn't before. True healing doesn't come from forgiving people who never asked for forgiveness. It comes from knowing you don't owe them anything anymore. A week later, I sat with my son Ryan over coffee. He's 44 now, a man with streaks of gray in his hair, a steady job, and kids of his own. Looking at him, I saw the boy who once shivered in that warehouse, bundled in blankets, asking me if we were poor. I told him about my decision, about the words I'd written. He leaned back, processing, then asked, "Dad, do you ever wish you'd just given him the grant? Just to let it go?" I shook my head. No, because letting go isn't the same as giving in. Ethan wasn't just a man who failed me. He was a man who took from us when we were at our weakest. If I'd helped him, I'd be teaching you and your sister the wrong lesson. That betrayal doesn't matter, that loyalty means nothing. But it does, Ryan. It means everything. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant, and I knew he understood. The lesson wasn't just about Ethan, it was about life itself. That night, Emily came by with her daughter. Little Lucy, bright-eyed and curious, bounced on my knee while Emily helped Laura in the kitchen. At one point, Emily sat across from me, lowering her voice. "Dad, Ryan told me about Ethan, about what you wrote on his application." I waited for her judgment, but instead she smiled softly. "You were right. I remember those nights in the warehouse. I didn't understand everything back then, but I remember how alone we felt. He could have made a difference. He chose not to. And I'll never forget how you fought for us. That's the only thing that matters to me." Her words landed heavier than any decision I'd ever made. My children hadn't grown up resenting me for those years of hardship. They remembered my fight, not my failure. Later, after everyone had gone home, Laura sat beside me. She'd stood by me through everything, through layoffs, warehouses, hunger, rebuilding, and now, this. She placed her hand over mine and whispered, "You did the right thing. And more than that, you did it for the right reason." She was right. It wasn't about punishing Ethan. It was about honoring the truth. The next day, I walked into the Foundation's office as usual. I looked at the wall lined with photos, smiling faces of small business owners, families and workers whose lives had been changed by a grant, people who had been given a chance when they needed it most. And I realized something powerful. Ethan's betrayal had shaped me, but it did not define me. What defined me was what I did in response. Standing there, I thought of my mother, Margaret. She'd been gone for years now, but her words still echoed, Friends are your second family. Blood doesn't always make family. Who shows up for you does. In a strange way, she had been right all along. Ethan showed me what a friend was not, and in turn, I learned what a true friend and a true man should be. So, what's the lesson in all this? It's simple, but it's everything. People will hurt you, some will betray you, some will disappear when the storms hit. But don't waste your life waiting for them to come back. Don't waste your energy hoping they'll make it right. Build your life anyway, build it stronger. Build it for the people who do stick around. As I tell you this now, I can say without hesitation, I'm grateful for every hardship, every cold night in that warehouse, every tear and every doubt. Because without them, I wouldn't be the man I am today. I wouldn't have built a foundation that changes lives. I wouldn't have shown my children that resilience is worth more than revenge. Ethan's name may have come back into my life, but his power over me ended decades ago. When I signed that denial, I wasn't punishing him, I was freeing myself. So here's what I'll leave you with. Hold tight to the ones who stand beside you when the world crumbles. They're your real family. And as for the ones who vanish, let them go. Because when all is said and done, friends stick around. And that's my story. A story about betrayal, survival, and what it really means to be a friend. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Life will show you who's really in your corner. Some people will walk away when the storms hit, but the ones who stay, the ones who fight beside you, that's your real family, no matter what blood says. So, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you thought you could trust? How did it change you? Share your story down in the comments. I'd love to read it. If this story spoke to you, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got more powerful stories coming, and I promise they'll make you feel, they'll make you think, and maybe even help you heal. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to get through life, and the best way to do it is together. Thanks for watching. Until next time, remember, real friends stick around.